The gallows of Sweetwater Gulch had never seen such a crowd, but it wasn't an execution drawing them in, it was the auction. Fiona Blackwell stood upon the wooden platform, her wrists bound with coarse rope that bit into her delicate skin, her honey-brown hair tumbling in wild disarray around her shoulders. The year was 1875, and the West had little mercy for women without means, especially those accused of theft. "Next up," bellowed Augustus Thornton, the portly auctioneer whose handlebar mustache quivered with each syllable, "a fine worker for your ranch or household. Young, strong, and healthy, though with a mite too much spirit, if you catch my meaning." The crowd chuckled appreciatively, eyeing Fiona with varying degrees of interest and malice. Fiona held her chin high despite the humiliation burning her cheeks. 3 days ago, she'd been a respectable schoolteacher in the neighboring town of Copper Creek. Now she stood to be sold into indentured servitude to pay for a crime she didn't commit. The gold pocket watch she'd been accused of stealing had been planted in her trunk by the mayor's son after she'd rejected his advances. At the back of the gathered crowd, Nathan Nichols leaned against a hitching post, his blue eyes narrowing beneath the brim of his worn Stetson. His weathered face betrayed nothing as he observed the proceedings, but his jaw tightened when he saw how the woman on the platform squared her shoulders against the jeers and whistles. "We'll start the bidding at $20, Thornton announced. "Who'll give me 20 for this fine specimen?" "20, shouted a burly cattle rancher known for working his hands until they collapsed. "25, called another man, a saloon owner whose girls rarely lasted more than a few months before disappearing or dying. Nathan's hand unconsciously moved to the pocket of his worn denim trousers, feeling the meager weight of coins and crumpled bills that represented everything he had left in the world. After 6 months of drought had decimated his small cattle herd, he'd come to town to sell his last 3 steers, hoping to buy seed to try his hand at farming instead. $40, came another bid, this time from Harold Jenkins, the local undertaker whose sallow face and skeletal frame made children cross the street to avoid him. Fiona's face paled visibly even from where Nathan stood. Everyone knew what happened to young women who ended up in Jenkins' household. The last one had been found floating in the creek after just 2 months. $40 going once, Thornton called, his voice rising with excitement as he sensed a profitable auction. Going twice, $52.38, a voice called out, and it took Nathan a moment to realize it was his own. The crowd parted, turning to stare at him in surprise. He stepped forward, his spurs jangling with each deliberate stride. Thornton's bushy eyebrows rose toward his balding pate. $52.38. It's all I have, Nathan said, his voice steady as he approached the platform. He reached into his pocket and pulled out every cent to his name the money meant to start his new life and held it up for all to see. "Every last dollar, and she's free with me." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Fiona's green eyes locked with Nathan's, a mixture of wariness, hope, and confusion swirling in their depths. "Well now," Thornton chuckled, rubbing his hands together, "ain't that a fine sentiment, but I don't believe that's how these auctions work, Cowboy. The lady here has a debt to society, and I said," Nathan repeated, his voice dropping to a dangerous timbre that silenced the crowd, "she's free with me. I'm buying her debt, not her person." The sheriff, who had been watching from nearby, stepped forward. "Nichols is right, Thornton. The law says he can purchase the debt, doesn't say anything about buying the person." Thornton's face reddened with frustration, but he was no fool. Nathan Nichols might look like a down-on-his-luck rancher, but everyone in 3 counties knew he'd been one of the fastest guns during the war. "Fine," he spat. $52.38 going once, going twice, sold to the gentleman with the empty pockets and foolish notions. Nathan climbed the steps to the platform, ignoring the whispers and snickers. He placed his money in Thornton's outstretched palm, then turned to Fiona. Without a word, he drew his knife and cut through her bonds. "You don't know me," he said quietly for her ears alone, "and you've no reason to trust me, but you're free to go wherever you please. I ask nothing in return." Fiona rubbed her chafed wrists, studying him with eyes that had seen too much deception to trust easily. "Why?" she asked simply. Nathan sheathed his knife. "Because no person should own another. That war's been fought and won." Before she could respond, a commotion broke out at the edge of the crowd. The mayor of Copper Creek pushed his way forward, his face purple with indignation, his son trailing behind him with a smug expression. "This is highly irregular," Mayor Whitfield bellowed. "This woman is a thief. She stole a family heirloom, a gold watch that's been in our family for generations." Nathan positioned himself slightly in front of Fiona. "Seems mighty convenient that the watch turned up in her trunk when by all accounts she's lived an honest life." Whitfield's son, Percy, stepped forward, his fancy waistcoat stretching over his ample belly. "Are you calling me a liar, Cowboy?" "I'm suggesting," Nathan replied evenly, "that a man whose advances are rejected might find ways to retaliate that don't involve honest accusations." Percy's face twisted with fury. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know that 6 people saw you follow Miss Blackwell home the night before the watch was discovered," Nathan said. "I know that Eliza Jenkins, rest her soul, refused your proposal last year and found herself accused of stealing silverware before she ended up dead. I've been watching, Percy. Maybe it's time someone spoke up." A hush fell over the crowd. Eliza Jenkins' death had been ruled an accident, but there had always been whispers. The sheriff stepped closer, his hand moving to rest on his gun belt. "That's a serious accusation, Nichols," Sheriff Monroe said. "It is," Nathan agreed, "and I'd be happy to back it up with witnesses." "Seems Miss Blackwell isn't the first schoolteacher to catch young Percy's eye or suffer for rejecting him." Mayor Whitfield's bluster faltered as he glanced at his son, whose face had drained of color. "Percy, what's he talking about?" Percy's hand darted to his jacket, but Nathan was faster. In a fluid movement that spoke of years of practice, he drew his revolver and leveled it at Percy's chest. "I wouldn't," he said softly. The gun that had been emerging from Percy's jacket clattered to the wooden platform. Sheriff Monroe was on him in an instant, twisting his arms behind his back. "I think we need to have a conversation down at the jailhouse," Monroe said, securing Percy with handcuffs. "About a watch, and maybe about a young woman who deserved better than what she got." As the sheriff led Percy away, with the mayor following in shocked disbelief, the crowd began to disperse, muttering about the unexpected turn of events. Soon, only Nathan and Fiona remained on the platform, facing each other in awkward silence. "You knew," Fiona said finally. "About Percy, about the watch." How? Nathan holstered his weapon and adjusted his hat. "I've been passing through towns in this territory for years. I remember reading about Eliza Jenkins in the newspaper. When I heard about your situation this morning, it sounded too familiar. I asked around and enough pieces fit together." Fiona wrapped her arms around herself, the enormity of what had nearly happened and what Nathan had done sinking in. "You spent everything you had to help a stranger." Nathan shrugged, suddenly uncomfortable with her scrutiny. "It was the right thing to do. And now, what will you do without any money?" "I still have my horse, my saddle, and 2 good hands," he offered a small smile. "I'll manage." Fiona studied him for a long moment. "Mr. Nichols, Nathan," he corrected. "Nathan," she amended. "I don't know how to thank you properly, but I do know that I'm a qualified teacher with nowhere to go, and if you're planning to start farming, you'll need help." Nathan raised an eyebrow. "Miss Blackwell, Fiona," she interrupted with the hint of a smile. "Fiona," he conceded. "Are you offering to help a stranger who might be as dangerous as the men you just escaped? Are you?" she challenged. For the first time that day, Nathan Nichols laughed. "No, madam, I'm not dangerous to anyone who doesn't deserve it. But farming's hard work, and my place is nothing to speak of, just a small cabin and about 40 acres of decent land. I grew up on a farm in Missouri before I trained as a teacher," Fiona said. "I'm no stranger to hard work, and I'd rather earn my way than accept charity, even from my rescuer." Nathan considered her offer. It made practical sense. He could use the help, and she clearly needed somewhere to go. But something in her determined gaze stirred feelings he'd thought long buried after losing his wife to influenza 3 years earlier. "It's not much of a place," he warned again. "It's not a gallows or an undertaker's back room," she countered. "That makes it paradise by comparison." Nathan nodded slowly. "All right then, we have a deal for now, until you decide what you really want to do." As they walked away from the auction platform, neither of them noticed the way the townspeople watched them go, or the speculative glances that followed. In a territory where gossip traveled faster than stagecoaches, the story of the broke cowboy who spent his last dollar to free a wrongfully accused schoolteacher was already spreading, growing more romantic with each retelling. The journey to Nathan's ranch took most of the day. They rode double on his chestnut gelding, Rusty, with Fiona perched uncomfortably behind the saddle, holding onto Nathan's belt to keep steady. The closeness was awkward for both of them, but neither complained. As they crested the final hill, Nathan reined Rusty to a stop. Below them stretched his modest ranch, a small cabin with a stone chimney, a weathered barn, a corral, and beyond, acres of land that had once supported a respectable herd of cattle but now lay fallow, waiting for a new purpose. "It's not much," Nathan said, echoing his earlier warning. "But it's paid for, at least." Fiona took in the sight with appreciation. After 3 days in a jail cell and the horror of the auction block, the simple homestead looked like heaven. "It's lovely," she said sincerely. Nathan gave a skeptical grunt but urged Rusty forward. As they approached, a black and white border collie came bounding from the direction of the barn, barking joyously. "That's Scout," Nathan said. "Best cattle dog in the territory, though he's not had much to do lately." Scout circled the horse, his tail wagging furiously as he welcomed his master home. When they dismounted, he approached Fiona cautiously, sniffing at her skirts before deciding she was acceptable and nudging her hand for attention. "He likes you," Nathan observed, sounding faintly surprised. "Animals usually do," Fiona said, scratching behind Scout's ears. "They're better judges of character than most people." Nathan's cabin was simple but clean, one main room with a stone fireplace, a sturdy table with 2 chairs, a cast-iron cookstove, and sparse furnishings. A curtained-off area in the back presumably hid his sleeping quarters. "You can have the bed," Nathan said, nodding toward the curtain. "I'll sleep in the barn until we can figure out something more appropriate." Fiona shook her head firmly. "I won't put you out of your home after everything you've done. The barn will be fine for me." "Miss Blackwell, Fiona," Nathan corrected himself. "I may not have much, but my mother raised me right. No woman is sleeping in my barn while I take the comfort of a bed." The stubborn set of his jaw told Fiona this was an argument she wouldn't win. "Very well," she conceded, "but only until we can make other arrangements." As the sun began to set, Nathan lit the lamps and built a fire in the hearth while Fiona examined the kitchen area. The pantry was sparsely stocked, some coffee, flour, beans, and salt pork, but she managed to put together a simple meal. They ate in companionable silence, both exhausted from the day's events. When they finished, Nathan rose and took his hat from its peg by the door. "I'll see to Rusty and bed down in the barn. There's water in the bucket by the stove if you want to wash up. I'll knock before coming in tomorrow morning." Fiona nodded gratefully. "Thank you, Nathan, for everything." After he left, Fiona allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. The day had been a whirlwind of terror, relief, and uncertainty. She had no idea what the future held, but for tonight, at least, she was safe. She used some of the water to wash her face and hands, then, too tired to do more, made her way to the curtained alcove. Nathan's bed was simple, a sturdy frame with a straw-filled mattress covered in clean, if somewhat worn, linens. A patchwork quilt provided warmth against the evening chill. Fiona removed her shoes but kept her clothes on, too conscious of being in a stranger's home to undress fully. As she slipped beneath the quilt, she caught the scent of pine soap and leather that seemed to be Nathan's own. Despite her intention to stay alert, exhaustion claimed her almost immediately. In the barn, Nathan made himself as comfortable as possible on a pile of hay, using his saddle as a pillow. Scout curled up beside him, providing warmth against the night's chill. As he stared up at the rafters, Nathan found himself thinking about the woman sleeping in his cabin. There was something about Fiona Blackwell that intrigued him beyond his initial desire to help someone in distress. She had spirit and dignity even when facing the worst circumstances. "What have we gotten ourselves into, Scout?" he murmured, scratching the dog's ears. Scout's only response was to thump his tail against the hay in contentment. Dawn arrived with a chorus of roosters from neighboring farms. Nathan washed at the pump, then knocked hesitantly on his own cabin door before entering. He found Fiona already awake and dressed, her hair neatly braided, standing at the stove where coffee was beginning to percolate. "Good morning," she greeted him with a tentative smile. "I hope you don't mind that I started breakfast." "Not at all," Nathan replied, hanging his hat on its peg. "It's been a while since anyone cooked in this kitchen besides me." As they shared a simple breakfast of coffee and biscuits, Nathan outlined his plans for the day. "I need to start preparing the south field for planting. The general store in town extended me credit for seed. They've known me long enough to trust I'm good for it, but I've never farmed before. I was counting on hiring help with what I got for the steers." "What were you planning to plant?" Fiona asked. "Wheat, mostly, maybe some corn." Fiona nodded thoughtfully. "My father always said to diversify. Wheat and corn are good, but you should consider vegetables too. They'll feed us through winter and could bring in money at the town market." Nathan looked at her with newfound respect. "You really did grow up on a farm." "I told you," she smiled. "I know my way around fields as well as school books." The next few weeks fell into a rhythm of hard work and gradual adjustment to their unusual partnership. Nathan taught Fiona about the particular challenges of farming in the territory's climate, while she shared knowledge from her family's farming experience. Together, they plowed fields, planted seeds, and repaired neglected fences. In the evenings, too tired for much conversation, they would sit by the fire, Nathan whittling or cleaning his guns, Fiona mending clothes or reading one of the few books he owned. Scout would lie between them, his head resting contentedly on whoever had most recently slipped him a morsel of food. Nathan continued to sleep in the barn despite Fiona's protests, though he had constructed a more comfortable pallet for himself. As the days passed, an easy camaraderie developed between them, but both carefully maintained a respectful distance, aware of the impropriety of their living arrangement. Their routine was disrupted one morning when Sheriff Monroe rode up to the cabin. Nathan was in the fields, and Fiona met the lawman at the door with apprehension. "Miss Blackwell," Monroe greeted her, removing his hat. "I'm glad to see you looking well." "Sheriff," she acknowledged cautiously. "What brings you out this way?" "News from town. Thought you and Nichols would want to hear it." He glanced toward the fields. "Is he around? I'll fetch him," Fiona said, stepping outside. She waved to catch Nathan's attention, and he quickly made his way back to the cabin. "Sheriff," Nathan nodded, wiping his hands on his trousers. "Something wrong?" "Not wrong exactly," Monroe replied. "Percy Whitfield confessed, not just to framing Miss Blackwell, but to causing Eliza Jenkins' death as well. Seems your confrontation that day shook something loose in him. The mayor's resigned in disgrace, and Percy's being transported to the territorial prison next week." Fiona let out a small gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. "So my name is cleared, completely," Monroe confirmed. "In fact, the town council voted this morning. They're offering you your teaching position back, with an increase in salary as compensation for the injustice you suffered." Nathan's expression remained neutral, but Fiona noticed how his shoulders stiffened slightly. She felt a strange reluctance at the prospect of returning to town, despite having yearned for exactly this vindication. "That's very generous," she said carefully. "When would they want me to start?" "The new term begins in 3 weeks, Monroe said. "Though they mentioned you could return to the teacherage immediately if you wished." Fiona nodded slowly. "Thank you for bringing the news, Sheriff. I'll need to think about it." After Monroe departed, an uncomfortable silence fell between Nathan and Fiona. Finally, Nathan spoke, his voice deliberately casual. "Sounds like a good opportunity. Teaching's surely easier than breaking your back in these fields." "It is," Fiona agreed, studying his face. "But we've just started here. The crops will need tending." Nathan shrugged. "I managed alone before." "I can do it again." "Is that what you want?" Fiona asked quietly. Nathan looked away, focusing on the distant hills. What I want doesn't matter much. You came here because you had nowhere else to go. Now you do." "Nathan," Fiona stepped closer, forcing him to look at her. "What I want matters to me, and I'm asking what you want." Something shifted in Nathan's blue eyes, a vulnerability he rarely allowed himself to show. "I've grown accustomed to having you here," he admitted gruffly, "but I won't hold you to an arrangement made out of necessity." Fiona's heart quickened at his words. Over the past weeks, her feelings for Nathan had evolved from gratitude to respect to something deeper she had been afraid to name. His quiet strength, his integrity, and the gentle way he treated her had awakened emotions she thought she'd never experience again after her fiancé had died in a mining accident 2 years earlier. "What if it's no longer about necessity?" she asked softly. "What if I've grown accustomed to being here too?" Nathan searched her face, looking for any sign of obligation or pity. Finding none, he took a careful step toward her. "Fiona, I don't want your gratitude." "Good," she replied with a small smile, "because what I'm feeling isn't gratitude." The tension between them crackled like the air before a summer storm. Nathan reached out slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. His calloused fingers were gentle against her cheek. "If you stayed," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "it wouldn't be as my farmhand." "What would it be as?" Fiona whispered, though she already knew the answer in her heart. Instead of replying with words, Nathan lowered his head and kissed her, a tender brush of lips that asked a question. Fiona answered by rising on her tiptoes, deepening the kiss with a certainty that surprised them both. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Nathan rested his forehead against hers. "I never expected to feel this way again," he confessed. "After my wife died, I thought that part of me was gone for good." "I felt the same after losing Thomas," Fiona admitted, "but these past weeks with you, something has changed. I feel alive again." Nathan took her hands in his. "I can't offer you much beyond this small ranch and a lot of hard work, but if you'd consider building a life here with me, I promise to do everything in my power to make you happy." Fiona squeezed his hands. "I don't need much, Nathan, just honesty, respect, and—" She paused, gathering her courage and love. "The rest we can build together." "Love," Nathan repeated, as if testing the word. "Yes, that's what this is, isn't it? I love you, Fiona Blackwell. It seems impossible after such a short time, but I do." "And I love you," she replied, the words feeling both foreign and perfectly right on her tongue. "Enough to choose this life over returning to town." The smile that broke across Nathan's face transformed him, erasing years of solitude and grief. He swept her into his arms, spinning her around as Scout barked excitedly at their feet. "We'll need to make this proper," Nathan said when he set her down. "I won't have people thinking what?" Fiona teased. "That you spent your last dollar to buy me at auction." Nathan laughed, a rich, full sound that Fiona decided she wanted to hear every day for the rest of her life. "When you put it that way, we already have quite the story to tell our grandchildren someday." "Let's start with children first," Fiona suggested, blushing at her own boldness. "Mrs. Patterson in town is a justice of the peace," Nathan said. "We could ride in tomorrow if you're certain." "I've never been more certain of anything," Fiona assured him. The next day, they rode into town together, not double on Rusty this time, but with Fiona on a gentle mare Nathan had borrowed from his nearest neighbor. They made an unusual sight: the schoolteacher, who'd nearly been auctioned into servitude, and the cowboy who'd spent his last dollar to set her free. Now hand in hand, as they entered Mrs. Patterson's front parlor to exchange vows. Word spread quickly through town, and by the time they emerged as husband and wife, a small crowd had gathered to offer congratulations. Even Sheriff Monroe was there, looking pleased with the outcome of events he'd helped set in motion. "The town council won't be happy to lose their teacher again so soon," he commented with a wink. "Tell them I've found a more important position," Fiona replied, smiling up at Nathan, "though I'd be willing to help with schooling for the outlying farms a few days a week if they're amenable." As they prepared to ride home to their home now, Nathan pulled Fiona close. "No regrets?" he asked softly. Only that we wasted 3 weeks with you sleeping in the barn, she whispered back, making him laugh and blush simultaneously. They returned to the ranch as the sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks that seemed to Nathan like a blessing on their union. Scout greeted them with his usual enthusiasm, circling their horses and leading the way to the cabin as if he understood the significance of the day. That night, as they lay together in what was now their bed, Nathan traced gentle patterns on Fiona's bare shoulder. "I keep thinking about that day at the auction," he murmured. "If I hadn't been in town, if I hadn't heard about your situation." Fiona placed her finger against his lips. "But you were, and you did. Everything that happened led us here to this moment, and I wouldn't change a thing." Nathan kissed her palm. "Not even the part where I spent my last dollar, especially not that part," Fiona smiled. "It was the best investment you ever made." "It certainly was," Nathan agreed, pulling her closer, "and it will keep paying dividends for the rest of our lives." As spring turned to summer, the crops flourished under their combined care. Fiona began teaching the children from neighboring farms 3 days a week in their front room. While Nathan's innovative farming techniques, a blend of traditional methods and new ideas from agricultural journals, Fiona ordered yielded impressive results. By fall, they had harvested enough to pay off their debts and put aside savings for the winter. And when the first snow fell, Fiona shared the news that their family would be growing by one come spring news that had Nathan grinning for days and carving a small wooden cradle by firelight each evening. Years later, when their 3 children would ask how they met, Nathan would always begin the story the same way. "Your mother was about to be auctioned off like cattle, and I paid my last dollar and said, 'She's free with me.'" And Fiona would always add with a loving glance at her husband, "And that's when I truly became free to love, free to build a life, and free to choose my own destiny." In a time and place where freedom was often measured in dollars and backed by gunpowder, they had found the rarest freedom of all the freedom that comes from being truly seen and loved for exactly who you are.